The rain started as a light drizzle on that humid July afternoon in the city. You know the kind, where the air feels thick and heavy, promising something more intense to come. I remember checking my weather app before leaving my apartment that morning, seeing only a 30% chance of precipitation, just enough to make me grab my small umbrella, but not enough to change my plans. That was my first mistake of the day, though it would lead to something I never could have anticipated. I'm Ethan, by the way, 28 years old, working as a graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing agency downtown. My friends would describe me as the quiet one, the observer. I've always been more comfortable behind my computer screen than in the spotlight. The city suits me, though. There's something comforting about being anonymous in a sea of 8 million people, all of us moving through our daily routines like synchronized swimmers who never actually acknowledge each other. That particular Tuesday, I was heading home after a client meeting that ran late. The subway platform was crowded with the usual mix of commuters, office workers loosening their ties, students with oversized headphones, tourists consulting their maps with confused expressions. I found my spot against the wall, pulled out my phone, and did what every New Yorker does, disappeared into my own digital world while waiting for the train. That's when I first noticed him. Tall, with dark curly hair and the kind of smile that seemed to create its own spotlight in the fluorescent-lit underground station. He was wearing a bartender's uniform, black button-up shirt, sleek vest, and carrying a worn leather messenger bag. Our eyes met briefly across the platform, that fleeting moment of connection that happens sometimes in the city, before we both looked away. Just another random encounter that should have faded into the background noise of urban life. Except the universe had other plans for us that day. The first rumble of thunder was so distant that most people didn't even notice it. But then came another, louder this time, followed by murmurs rippling through the crowd as people checked their phones for weather updates. I remember thinking I should have checked the forecast more carefully that morning. The air in the station felt different suddenly, charged with a nervous energy as the sound of rain intensified above us. "Looks like we're in for a big one," a voice said beside me. I turned to find the bartender, the one I'd noticed earlier, now standing next to me, looking up at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the storm above. "Yeah," I replied, immediately regretting how uninspired my response sounded. "My app said 30% chance this morning." He laughed, a warm sound that somehow cut through the ambient noise of the station. "Never trust those apps. My grandmother's knee is more reliable, and it's been aching all week." He extended his hand. "I'm Liam." "Ethan," I replied, shaking his hand and noticing how his touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary. That's when the first screams came from the entrance to the station. We both turned to see people rushing down the stairs, soaking wet and wide-eyed. Behind them came what I can only describe as a waterfall. The street above had flooded so quickly that water was now cascading down the subway entrance stairs like urban rapids. "Holy shit," Liam muttered, and I found myself unconsciously stepping closer to him as the crowd around us began to panic. The station attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, something about service suspensions and seeking higher ground, but it was hard to hear over the commotion. People were pushing toward the other exits, but reports were coming in that those were flooding too. The storm had intensified from a summer shower to something much more dangerous in minutes. "We need to get away from those stairs," Liam said, his hand suddenly on my elbow, guiding me backward. "If the water keeps rising at this rate, this whole platform could flood." I felt a surge of anxiety tightening my chest. Flooding in the subway was my urban nightmare, being trapped underground as water levels rose. "Where can we go?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. Liam's eyes scanned the platform, then fixed on something behind me. "There," he said, pointing to a service door that was usually kept locked. Except now it stood slightly ajar, perhaps left open by a maintenance worker who had rushed to deal with the flooding. "We can't go in there," I protested, but Liam was already moving toward it, pulling me along. "Trust me," he said with a confidence I envied. "I worked construction in these tunnels during college. There are maintenance corridors that run above the water level. It's safer than staying here." I hesitated for just a moment before following him. The water was now ankle-deep on the platform, and the crowd's panic was becoming dangerous. As we slipped through the service door, I cast one last glance back at the chaos. The scene looked apocalyptic, water pouring down the stairs, people wading through rising water, the lights flickering ominously. Liam closed the door behind us, muffling the sounds of panic. We found ourselves in a narrow corridor lit by sparse emergency lights that cast everything in an eerie red glow. The air was cooler here, with the distinctive smell of concrete and electricity that permeates the subway system's hidden infrastructure. This way, Liam said, moving with purpose down the corridor. There should be a maintenance tunnel that runs parallel to the tracks. It'll be dry and safe until the storm passes. How do you know so much about this? I asked, following closely behind him, not wanting to lose sight of his figure in the dim light. Like I said, I worked down here for 2 summers. Union job, good pay for a college kid. Learned all the hidden pathways of the city. He glanced back at me with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, I'm not leading you into a horror movie scenario. Despite everything, I laughed. That's exactly what someone in a horror movie would say. We continued down the corridor, which eventually opened into a wider tunnel. True to Liam's word, it was dry, though we could hear the ominous sound of rushing water somewhere in the distance. The maintenance tunnel was lined with cables and pipes, with occasional alcoves containing equipment and tools. We should be safe here, Liam said, stopping in one of the larger alcoves. The storm will pass eventually, and then we can head back up. I checked my phone. No service, of course. Any idea how long we might be stuck down here? Liam shrugged, setting his messenger bag down and leaning against the wall. Hard to say. Summer storms can be intense, but usually blow over quickly. Could be an hour, could be longer. The reality of our situation began to sink in. I was trapped in a maintenance tunnel with a complete stranger during what sounded like the storm of the century. Yet somehow, I wasn't as terrified as I should have been. There was something about Liam's presence that was reassuring, a calm confidence that made me feel like we'd get through this. So, he said, sliding down to sit on the floor and patting the space beside him, since we might be here a while. Tell me about yourself, Ethan the graphic designer. I raised an eyebrow. How did you know I'm a graphic designer? He grinned, pointing to my messenger bag. The Adobe sticker, the sketchbook peeking out, and the fact that you're wearing what I call creative professional clothes. Nice enough to meet clients, but artistic enough to establish your creative credentials. I sat down beside him, impressed. That's some Sherlock Holmes-level observation. Bartenders develop a knack for reading people quickly, he explained. It helps with tips. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the storm and water. The tunnel was cool, and I found myself shivering slightly. Cold? Liam asked, noticing immediately. A little, I admitted. Without hesitation, he scooted closer, his shoulder pressing against mine. Body heat, he explained with a casual shrug that didn't quite match the intensity in his eyes. Basic survival tactic. I nodded, suddenly very aware of how close we were sitting. So, Liam the bartender with construction experience and people reading skills. What's your story? He laughed softly. Not as interesting as you might think. 30 years old, working at the Emerald on 9th Street while I finish my business degree. I want to open my own place someday. What kind of place? I asked, genuinely curious. A neighborhood bar with character. Somewhere that feels like a second home to people, you know? Not too fancy, not too dive-why. Just right. His face lit up as he described his vision, and I found myself captivated by his enthusiasm. That sounds amazing, I said. The city needs more places with soul. Exactly. He turned toward me, our faces now closer than I expected. Most places now are either pretentious cocktail bars with $18 drinks or sticky floor dives. I want something in between, quality without pretension. A particularly loud crash of thunder interrupted our conversation, and I involuntarily jumped. Liam's hand found mine in the dim light, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Just thunder, he said softly. We're safe down here. He didn't let go of my hand immediately, and I didn't pull away. There was something surreal about the situation. The red-tinged darkness, the distant storm, the unexpected intimacy with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger anymore. I've always been afraid of storms, I admitted, feeling strangely comfortable sharing this vulnerability. Ever since I was a kid, my apartment lost power during Hurricane Sandy, and I was alone for 3 days in the dark. Haven't been a fan since then. Liam nodded understandingly. That would do it. I grew up in Florida, so hurricanes were just a fact of life. My family had a ritual. We'd gather in the living room with candles, board games, and my dad would tell these elaborate stories to distract us from the chaos outside. That sounds nice, I said, imagining a young Liam surrounded by family, feeling safe despite the storm. It was. made me realize that sometimes the scariest situations can create the most meaningful connections. His eyes met mine in the dim light, and something unspoken passed between us. The hours passed surprisingly quickly as we talked. I learned that Liam had moved to the city 8 years ago after college, that he had a younger sister studying marine biology, that he collected vintage bar tools, and that he could make over 200 different cocktails from memory. He listened attentively as I told him about my work, my struggle to balance commercial projects with my personal art, and my dream of one day illustrating a graphic novel. What struck me most was how easy it was to talk to him. In the city, we build walls around ourselves, necessary barriers against the constant stimulation and demands for our attention. But down in that tunnel, those walls seemed to dissolve. Perhaps it was the unusual circumstances, or maybe it was just Liam himself, but I found myself sharing thoughts I rarely voiced, even to close friends. "Do you ever feel lonely here?" I asked after a lull in conversation. "In the city, I mean. Surrounded by millions of people, but somehow still alone." Liam was quiet for a moment before answering. "All the time," he finally said. "It's the great paradox of urban life, isn't it? Never actually alone, but frequently lonely." "Exactly," I said, relieved that he understood. "I have friends, colleagues, I go out, I do things, but sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Like I'm watching my life instead of living it." "I know that feeling," Liam said softly. "Behind the bar, I connect with dozens of people every night. I hear their stories, their problems, their celebrations. But it's all temporary. At the end of my shift, I walk home alone." He shifted slightly, his arm now pressed against mine from shoulder to elbow. "My last relationship ended because he said I was emotionally unavailable, that I was great at surface-level charm, but never let anyone see beneath that." The casual way he mentioned he made my heart rate quicken slightly. I'd been wondering, hoping, but hadn't wanted to assume. "Was he right?" I asked. Liam sighed. "Probably. It's easier to keep things light, you know? Especially in this city where everything feels transient. People come and go. Relationships start and end. Nothing feels permanent." "I get that," I said. "My last boyfriend said something similar, that I was always holding part of myself back. But it's self-protection, isn't it? Opening up completely means risking complete devastation when things end." "When, not if," Liam noted with a sad smile. "That's telling. I hadn't realized what I'd said until he pointed it out. I guess I've come to expect endings." "Me too," he admitted. "Though sometimes I wonder what I'm missing by always preparing for the goodbye before the hello has even settled." Another crash of thunder, closer this time, made the lights flicker. Without thinking, I moved closer to Liam, and his arm slipped around my shoulders. "Still not a fan of storms, I see," he said, but there was no teasing in his voice. "Not really," I admitted, "though this one has had some unexpected benefits." He looked at me questioningly, and I felt a surge of boldness. "I mean, under normal circumstances, we would have just been two people who made brief eye contact on a subway platform and then went our separate ways. Instead, here we are." "Here we are," he repeated softly, his eyes holding mine. "Hiding from a storm in a maintenance tunnel, sharing our deepest insecurities. Not how I expected my Tuesday to go." "Me neither. But I'm not complaining." His arm tightened slightly around my shoulders. "Neither am I." We sat like that for a while, the silence between us comfortable now. I was acutely aware of his breathing, the slight movement of his chest, the warmth of his body against mine. It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of connection with someone, the kind that seems to bypass all the usual social formalities and strikes at something deeper. "Can I ask you something personal?" Liam said after a while. "Given that we've been sharing our emotional wounds for the past hour, I think we're past the point of asking permission," I replied with a small laugh. He smiled. "Fair point. I was wondering, what makes you happy, Ethan?" "Really, genuinely happy." The question caught me off guard. It was simple yet profound, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me that. "That's a really good question," I said, taking a moment to think. "Small moments of beauty, I guess. When I'm drawing and lose track of time because I'm so absorbed in creating something. Walking through the city at dawn when everything is quiet and full of possibility. Conversations like this one, where it feels real instead of performative." I turned to look at him. "What about you?" "Connection," he said without hesitation. "Real connection. When you're with someone, friend, family, lover, even a stranger, and for a moment, the masks come off and you see each other clearly. Those moments are rare, but they're what make everything else worthwhile. As he spoke, I realized we were having exactly that kind of moment. In the strange liminal space of the maintenance tunnel, with the storm raging above, we had somehow created a bubble of authenticity that felt more real than much of my day-to-day life. A sudden noise from further down the tunnel made us both tense. It wasn't thunder this time, but a metallic clanging followed by what sounded like footsteps. "What was that?" I whispered, instinctively pressing closer to Liam. "Not sure," he said, his body alert. "Could be maintenance workers checking for flooding." The sound came again, closer this time. Liam stood up, pulling me with him. "Stay behind me," he said, his protective instinct kicking in. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" No response, just another clang, then silence. We stood frozen, waiting. My heart was pounding, and I realized I was gripping Liam's arm tightly. "Should we move?" I whispered. Before he could answer, a large rat scurried across the tunnel floor in front of us, followed by two more. The source of the noise became clear. They had been knocking over some tools or equipment as they fled the flooded areas. The tension broke, and we both laughed with relief. "City wildlife," Liam said, shaking his head. "Always more terrifying than actual dangers." Still laughing, we looked at each other, and something shifted in the atmosphere between us. Perhaps it was the adrenaline, or the hours of intimate conversation, or simply the uniqueness of our situation, but suddenly the air felt charged with possibility. "Ethan," Liam said softly, his hand coming up to rest lightly on my cheek. "I know this is crazy. We just met. But I feel like—" I didn't let him finish. Moving on instinct rather than thought, I closed the distance between us and kissed him. His surprise lasted only a fraction of a second before he was kissing me back, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, years of city-induced loneliness and emotional walls crumbling in an instant of connection. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Liam rested his forehead against mine. "Well," he said with a smile I could hear in his voice even in the dim light, "that's one way to wait out a storm." I laughed softly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Trust me, that was much better than whatever I was going to say." His hands were still on my waist, keeping me close. "Though I do want to be clear about something." "What's that?" I asked, suddenly nervous. "This isn't just a storm thing for me. I don't want this to be one of those intense moments that disappears as soon as we go back to normal life." His voice was serious now. "I'd like to see you again, preferably somewhere with better lighting and fewer rats." Relief and happiness flooded through me. "I'd like that too. Very much." We stayed like that for a while longer, talking softly, exchanging occasional kisses, the storm and our surroundings fading into the background as we focused on each other. It was surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once, the beginning of something neither of us had expected when we woke up that morning. Eventually, we noticed that the sounds of rushing water had diminished, and the thunder was now distant and infrequent. Checking the time, we realized we'd been in the tunnel for nearly 4 hours. "I think the worst has passed," Liam said, reluctantly releasing me from his embrace. "We should probably try to find our way back." I nodded, equally reluctant to end our time in this strange sanctuary. Back to reality. He took my hand, interlacing our fingers. With one significant change to reality, I hope. We gathered our things and made our way back through the corridor, eventually finding a different exit that led up to street level. Emerging into the evening air was like stepping into another world. The storm had indeed passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the emerging stars and a freshness that had washed away the city's usual summer stuffiness. The streets were a mess, debris scattered about, some minor flooding still evident in low-lying areas, but people were already out and about, surveying the damage and beginning the process of returning to normal. New Yorkers are nothing if not resilient. Standing on the sidewalk, still holding hands, we looked at each other in the natural light for the first time since our brief encounter on the platform. Liam's eyes were even more striking than I'd realized, a warm hazel with flecks of gold, and his smile made something flutter in my chest. "So," he said, squeezing my hand gently, "what happens now?" I took out my phone, which had finally regained service, and handed it to him. "Now you give me your number, and we make plans for that better lit, rat-free date you mentioned." As he entered his contact information, I looked around at the post-storm city. Everything looked different somehow, cleaner, more vibrant, full of possibility. Or maybe it was just me who had changed in those hours underground. There, Liam said, handing my phone back. I'm free tomorrow night, by the way. Just in case you were wondering. I smiled, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow sounds perfect. We stood there for a moment longer, reluctant to part despite our plans to meet again so soon. Finally, Liam leaned in and kissed me softly. See you tomorrow, Ethan. Try to stay dry until then. As I watched him walk away, I thought about how the most meaningful connections often come when we least expect them, during disruptions to our carefully planned routines, in moments of vulnerability, when circumstances force us out of our comfort zones. The storm had flooded the subway entrance and driven us into that maintenance tunnel, but it had also washed away the barriers we might have otherwise maintained. Sometimes, I realized, you have to weather a storm to find your sunshine. Total_char_count, 18,613.